Any second now. All right, Chris, I'm watching it live on YouTube, and we're still sitting on the slate.
Okay, just move, carry on, and I'll take care of that. All right, Ed, we're live and good to go.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jameson, are you opening?
I'm going to open it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order on today's date, February 7th, 2022, Communications Forum. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, everyone. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agenda approved. Communications Forum norms, Dr. Jameson.
Thank you, President Miller. We are going to take a brief moment to review the Communications Forum team norms. I will not read these to you, but I am asking that everyone take a brief moment to review the 6 norms that currently exist to guide our collaboration and conversation this evening. Once you have an opportunity to review the norms, I will ask everyone to put their thumb up so that we know that everyone is in agreement with the norms that have been outlined. Is it possible for you to share the agenda with Ms. Kruger?
I already shared it with her. I just did a few seconds ago.
Awesome, thank you. think we need the norm shared as well. All right, and once everyone has their thumb up, whether virtually, I'll know that the norms have been reviewed.
Someone asked that if we could put the link in the chat.
The link to the YouTube stream.
I think to the norms.
The
I'm
norms.
guessing.
I would just say drop the board agenda information in. Thank you, Roxana. So just to briefly go over the norms, there are norms outlined for how we utilize time, how we engage in listening to each other, keeping in mind that the discussions that are had here are confidential and how we plan to move forward after this information is received. It outlines the process for decision-making, how we each will participate, and the expectations for each of the members of this group. Are there any questions about the norms before we move forward? All right, perfect. So just to go over, I know that this committee met a few times last year and in the past because of other committees that exist, like Teacher Leader Forum, as well as CBTF. This committee did not meet as frequently, but just to discuss the purpose of Communication Forum is to bring about district issues or concerns that surface from individual buildings, not individual issues or concerns from teachers. So the association members or reps in each building solicited topics and worked collaboratively with their principals to identify topics and narrow those down, which are what is included in the agenda. And then as we go through, we will take notes, and the reps from the meeting today are responsible for taking that information back to their buildings and sharing with all stakeholders. So the first topic that actually was listed to discuss was around electronic discipline referral process. This item surfaced from one of the high school groups, and it reads, the question presented, is there an official way for teachers to write a referral like through Power Schools where it is linked to a student permanently? The Google form we currently use is a step in the right direction over email, but it's still not officially being tracked with student profiles, as admin then have to transfer the information over to EduClimber. I think it's important to identify this information for frequent flyers. So this came from Rich McCullum and Dave Gainey. Anyone from the call want to add information to that before we begin discussing?
I can just kind of jump in for a second. It sounds to me that, and forgive me, Rich and Dave, if I'm kind of stepping over you, but that seems more like a building type issue unless it's something that the district takes on. The thing I know about EduClimber is that people in the high school don't really know it very well. It might be like a PD kind of a thing, if that's something that we choose to do. I think it's great to have a way to, I mean, we used to do that in Power School, right? I mean, Power School used to be able to track all kinds of things, but EduClimber is something that you can use to track test scores. Personally, I think it's a little on the clunky side, but I think it's something that can absolutely, work. We just need to get the teachers trained on how to use it.
And I think we, Otto, thank you for chiming in. I think we have had discussions about that, and Rachel has been sharing how we might be able to build that out, because that is not the first time that information was shared. So Rachel, can you share kind of where we are in looking at how to make that accessible for teachers?
You mean the referral process for incidents? Yes. So we do have there is a feature in Power School that can be turned on for a referral process, and we can get that set up and going if that is of interest and of need. Chris, do you want to add more to that?
It's relatively straightforward from the teacher perspective. Any teacher logged into Power School can submit that that referral request, and then emails are then subsequently sent to the admin, and they can then turn that into a log entry. So the functionality is there. I believe it is on currently. We just have to train it. It would be something that we would probably need to come together as an admin team and decide the scope of how we would start using that, whether we would start using that in just the high school as a beta and move out to the other buildings. But that's a conversation perhaps for another day. The functionality is there and we can do it whenever you'd like.
And we can also explore professional development opportunities. It sounds like some PD is warranted for teachers with EduClimber as well. So Rachel has been supporting buildings. I know building leaders have been requesting Rachel to come in and work with teachers during their collaboration time to have more access to EduClimber, as well as the function and how to pull down data and other reports. So that's something we can plan, and Rachel can reach out to the building principals to schedule time for teacher professional development. I'm actually going to move back up to one of the items that I actually skipped over. But before I do so, are there any other questions about the concern raised about having the ability to write a referral and track that data and information across students? Mr. Gainey, does the response provide an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you. It's not, it would be nice. It's one less window that we would have to open if it's right in Power School. Being new, having to like navigate EduClimber and then something else, having it all in one place might be easier for us newbies. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else from the team before we move on to the next shared topic item? All right, the next item comes from the middle school, Ms. Swabata, Welch, and Kruger. The question here is, as we look at having student voices become more a part of decisions within buildings and across the district, we may want to walk more cautiously and look at the long-term impact of unintended consequences of the decisions. It says, in addition, staff are being included in the process as well before decisions are ultimately being made. What can we do to make sure we are finding a balance between student voice and staff voice? I'm going to ask Ms. Kruger if you want to unmute and maybe share a little bit more about the question that's being posed so that it's clear for me.
Sure. So I know with a lot of decisions now, I know we're moving to a space where we're allowing students, we're doing a lot more circles, we're getting student engagement more involved in decision making, having their voices heard across, multiple classrooms, multiple platforms, and just the idea of what does that look like in terms of decisions being made? What does that look like in terms of, engaging all stakeholders in the process, and just being cautious with the process of whatever that looks like.
So it sounds like you're interested at the middle school level to have a process developed regarding how student voice is elicited and how it's being used for decision making.
Yes.
And Dr. Dietrich, is this something that you and your team are currently working on, or can you maybe give some additional insight?
I think it was January 13th, we actually started doing some circles with students, but we also had staff open invitation as well. We had Our goal was to have one student from each advisory, but also have a very diverse group of students. It was open invitation to teachers. And we discussed 4 different topics that were what we considered hot topics, whether that topic came from students or staff, and we allowed both students and staff to have a voice in the room. We had a conversation. Craig and I actually stepped out of the circle and listened to what students said, listened to what teachers said, had it moderated by Naomi Warren, so that there wasn't any like admin influence on the conversation. But we had a conversation about, we want to hear everybody's voice, but sometimes there also is vote, and that, Craig and I need to make decisions based on everybody's voice. So I would guess that that's the context that we're looking for.
So just as a follow-up, Dr. Dietrich, so that I'm clear, and maybe others who are on the call and as well as the board, are you working with staff to outline for them so that they clearly see what the process is for decision making? Or is it just more or less having voices at the table?
So we spoke with staff and just said, hey, we're getting these students together. We sent an email out saying, this is what we're doing. Here's what the 4 topics are going to be for this. So example would be, there was some frustration from, or staff wanted to talk more about homework and expeditions. Students wanted to talk more about cell phones in the building and hoodies in the building. But yes, we talked to them, and we did a actual process of the circle where students talked first, then teachers were able to come in, and then students came back in the circle and they were allowed to share final thoughts.
So Ms. Kruger, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding and trying to delineate if this is maybe a building process that needs to be built out and not necessarily a district process. So are you wanting administration at the middle school level to clearly delineate which topics or decisions, or who's responsible for making certain decisions?
Yeah, I think, this probably is better served at the building level.
Okay. Dr. Dietrich, can you work with Ms. Kruger and those individuals to maybe outline that process? That will be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on to the next item? All right, so this one came out of the Early Childhood Center, and the question is around rethinking sick and personal days and having those to convert to PTO days. And the rationale would be to decrease the number of staff absences that we have. Roxana, do you, I know this has been a conversation that has come up before in our teacher leader group. May I ask for you to chime in?
Sure. So this is something that has been an ongoing discussion at CBTF, which Francis and others who participated in that group can also chime in on. We have looked at it. We have collected a number of times different districts' schemes. It does tangle in a lot of places. So what those days can be used for, how many days you get. Districts that do that we talked to reported increased absences, not fewer absences. And there were things that we would have to give up in order to get. And so each time it has been looked at by CBTF, it has not been something that has been moved forward for a number of reasons. But if that is something that continues to be of interest to the district, then CBTF would be the appropriate place to go so that we can gather additional information for that group, because there's obviously cost associated with that, and that would be an added expense that would have to be taken into consideration. And for districts that move that way, sometimes people also lose other benefits. So we just need to make sure that we're looking at it in balance.
Roxanne, is this an item that we can add to our next agenda for CBTF?
Absolutely.
So we will have that item for discussion. It may also be helpful to identify the districts that allow sick days to transition over to personal days, so that the individuals that raise that concern can see what that looks like for large districts. And then I think the most important piece is what that looks like for districts that are like our size as well for that. For our Early Childhood Center rep, was there anything else that needed to be asked or shared regarding that particular question or topic that was listed?
No, that was just something that came up that they said that they've talked about at the CBTF meetings, and we're just kind of looking for, like you're saying, Dr. Jameson, some kind of a clear picture of what it would look like if we did want to go that, ask for that route, or to leave things as is. I think getting a more clear picture of exactly what we would have to kind of give up versus keeping it the same. And I think comparing it to other districts the same size will be very helpful.
So it sounds like as an action item, we indicated that this item would go to CBTF, but what I'm hearing the ask is one, to identify what districts currently allow sick days to roll into personal days would be the first thing that the ECC would like to see. The second would be the cost impact for a change such as that. And then maybe the third would be a recommendation for what might be lost if this is implemented. Does that capture what maybe would be beneficial for the group to see in CBTF?
Yes, I think so.
Perfect. Any other questions or concerns about the ECC topic around sick days being transitioned into personal days? All right, so the next topic is coming from the high school group. And the question is, we'd be interested in discussing the procedure and method for input for hiring the new assistant superintendent and the high school dean of students attendance secretary in our building. So I will start with the first one because the assistant sup position is a cabinet level position. I do plan on engaging varying buildings to see what one would be looking for that particular building, like attributes as it relates to the person coming in because of the work associated with curriculum and instruction, and also the work with the cats. So that would be, I don't know what that looks like for our current process. Roxana can actually chime in there, but I do think it's important to ask those questions and look at those attributes so that as we're looking at candidates, we are able to keep that in mind for that. But the process, Roxana, for hiring for cabinet level positions, can you maybe share that out with the team?
Helpful to take mute off. So the first step would be, I think, to, as Benita said, we can usually do it through focus groups, but meeting with staff members that will be impacted, figuring out what they are thinking and looking for. Obviously, we also talk to the administrative team to make sure that we understand what's happening and we review job descriptions. So that would be the first step. The second step would be to put together a fairly diverse group of people to do some paper screening to see if we can find applicants that match the qualities and the background that is desired. Then we assemble interview teams. So we will do a staff team that would do interviews. We also do a community-based team that would include parents and other community members. There's also a writing prompt, which typically we ask questions about what the building and or the district cares about. And there's usually something that involves looking at data and making sure that folks can both communicate effectively, but also do data sorts and can handle complex problem solving. We would run those committees and then that would be the first round of interview. From that round of interview, we typically identify more than one person that we believe would move forward. And so the next round, the funnel gets a little bit smaller. We still take a smaller diverse group and do semi-structured interviews so that we can have more conversation and follow up on things that we didn't hear or wanted to hear or want to know more about. And at that point, usually we have a clear candidate in mind. If not, then we would add additional rounds as we needed to add them. But that is kind of the process. So there will be multi-levels in which folks will be able to give input and also hopefully to serve on some of those committees and help us gather a lot of good information and also to make good decisions. So I hope that answers the question.
Mr. McCullum, Mr. Gainey, was there anything else as far as Roxana's explanation of the process for hiring the 2 positions at the building level?
Well, I mean, I think I understand what it is, what it would be at the superintendent level, and then I presume the building level would be in charge of that process. Is that right? Is that what I'm to take from that?
Yes.
So if the faculty has questions about hiring at the assistant principal or dean of students level, Dr. Grauer should be able to answer those.
Dr. Grauer will be working directly with me. HR will still facilitate the process, but it will be essentially a process that, yes, your building principal will be the person that is in charge of that. I will run the process, but the building principal will be in charge of the hiring decisions and making sure that we get all the input that we need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thought around that particular topic? All right, the next topic comes from the elementary school. And the first question is around what are the plans to support teacher retention? And I know that we submitted and our teacher retention grant was accepted by the state. And so Roxana, would you share the process that you used to engage teachers around our teacher retention grant and what was outlined or identified in that grant?
Sure. We worked through PDC. So PDC met, we looked at the outline of that grant and what was allowable. PDC actually did a survey. I'm going to say, I don't remember what month it was. It was either in October. I think it was in October. It might have been November, of staff asking. We had 5 categories and we asked staff to identify the categories that they cared most about, that they thought would be most influential in terms of helping their work-life balance at the time and what they wanted to see happen. 3 main areas were identified. So one was asking for additional permanent subs in the building to try to keep teachers from having to cover classes for other teachers. One category was support for social emotional learning, so giving teachers more resources and support for dealing with the range of emotions and behaviors that they were seeing with students. And a third was to assist teachers themselves in terms of wellness activities and self-care activities. And so we applied for all 3 categories of that grant and have been approved for activities through all 3 categories. We did allow the buildings to self-select where they wanted the emphasis of their funds in those categories. So we will see some variances between buildings. Since we submitted the grant, DESE has now disallowed some things that they were going to allow in the teacher wellness category. So we will have to go back to the buildings and ask them to make sure that whatever were being purchased can be housed at the building level as opposed to individual items that folks would take home. And that's a DESE decision, not an MRH decision. But we have been approved, the budget has been submitted, and so we do have a pool of money that we can expend in any of those ways.
And I think I'll also add, when we think about burnout, one of the things that I ask teachers, support staff when I'm in the building, what do you need? And they say time. And so we have been working to give time back however we can, whether it's trying to take to the board, extending breaks, because we do recognize that this time is trying, and then working with building leaders to give time back instead of having 2-3 staff meetings, giving time for teachers to have the opportunity to plan or collaborate, whether it's independently or collectively. And so we recognize that time is much more beneficial than things, and trying to identify ways to give that time back has really been the aim across the semester. Abby, does that answer your question regarding teacher burnout and how we plan to work towards retention?
Yes, as a rep tonight, I hear what you're saying about the grant. I appreciate that you brought up time. I would say that is very commonly spoken about, and I know Angela has also done kind of a lot of the things you mentioned with canceling things or shortening things in order to give teachers their time back. I think other that I am speaking correctly for classroom teachers. Other aspects have included time, like within our calendar, such as like records days. You know, for an elementary teacher, it's 4 times a year, but only getting 2 records days. And so feeling the expectation is that is hours and hours of work outside of school, along with some exhibit work outside of school. And again, and then our calendar, which I know goes to calendar committee, just with like the amount of days we work and with our salary and with looking at other schools in the region. Those are some common things that are expressed.
Well, I will say the positive news is that those are all considerations that Ed is currently working on as he convenes the calendar committee. And one of the things that we're discussing is looking at the hours in the school day rather than planning from days. So that is conversation that's being had. And so, of course, this year's calendar has already been built. And then looking at surrounding district calendars is also another consideration that was shared with Ed as well as he convenes the calendar committee. So, you know, those conversations when I'm randomly in buildings asking those questions about where the support is needed. But I, you know, also am curious as to how do we provide support and professional development to teachers around grades being entered, if we need to make tweaks or switches to power schools for the standards-based grading and some of the things that teachers have to do to lighten the load in that direction as well. So I think that's part of the conversation. Please know that my team and I are having those conversations. It's just not necessarily a quick flip, but for 23-24, all of the things that you mentioned are being considered. And I have been engaging my team around the 22-23 calendar to see what adjustments we can make. So just to share with this group so that you are aware, one of the things I noticed when we returned back from winter break was that the aim was for teachers not to plan or prepare over break and to actually practice self-care. Well, it's difficult to do that when you return the same day that students walk into the classroom. And so that was loud and clear, and that was shared with me in all of the buildings that I visited. So we did have conversation about that, and our COA team, Rachel, was working on looking at the number of hours, the days, what would need to happen in order to make that work. So whether or not that could be a PD day where teachers can actually use it to collaborate, whether it's in their teams vertically or by department. So we are not there yet, but preliminary conversations are being had. And we also talked about looking at one of the early release days as a day where teachers can actually work on records. So again, no decisions have been made. Please note that we are currently discussing those, and we have heard you when those items have been shared. More information forthcoming.
Thank you. Yeah, I will be sure to share that with staff. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or thoughts about that topic? All right, the next topic is around the SEL staff in the buildings. And I think this came out in another question about their response to student and family needs. And this topic is around how is the team being supported to ensure that they can sustain their work. That also was an item from the elementary school. And Abby, can I ask a little, if you can clarify and provide more context when you mentioned support? What was the team thinking about from the elementary school for that particular topic?
I might need to rely on my admin friends are here, as I am not as involved in that area and just representing tonight. I'm sorry.
Dr. Jameson, Abby is really stepping in for us tonight, so I can fill this in, just having heard this from, as we were soliciting topics. Our SEL team, obviously, there are a lot of social and emotional needs for our students and our staff and our families, everyone alike this year. And our SEL team is really kind of on the front line of tending to those needs for everyone. And so just ensuring that supporting classroom teachers and everyone in the building for when that team is being pulled in a number of ways, for us to be able to address student situations in the classroom right at that moment, but then also just for, again, caring and tending to those teachers or to that team who's, really on that front line of supporting the huge range of needs that are presented to us each day.
Okay, so support, is that something that can be viewed with some of the items that Roxana mentioned as a part of the teacher retention grant, or are they seeking professional development, or is there a specific ask? I'm just trying to drill down to see what specifically they are thinking as we think about support for that group of staff members.
I think time is a thing. There are not enough hours in the day, right? A number of students. And my response to this, if you don't mind me chiming in, we are pushing through, we're piloting here in this building a proactive approach to some counseling lessons here by getting a survey of how our students are presenting, externalizing and internalizing behaviors, and then what our building support team is doing to push in again and be proactive about what's coming up in that data. And right now, because we are addressing individual needs on a very quick and individual everyday basis, time maxes out, right? And there's all of those needs that we're kind of chasing around. So one thing that we're doing is just trying to put a system in place to support on that proactive and rather than reactive, and give space for to really maximize our staff and our efforts in that way. We have also added a TA whose focus is on SEL, being able to, his primary job is to be able to handle those in the moment needs of students so that our SEL team can handle more of that proactive approach.
So here's what I captured. You can tell me if this is correct. So I know we have the district team that was formerly called the SEL team, which we are transitioning to MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, which is going to be a huge focus for MSIP 6 coming from the state. And so that's going to be an area that we're looking at for next year. It sounds like from the district level, as we think about system development, it may be advantageous for us to look at a screening tool district-wide. And I am very familiar with the one that you're referencing, the SRSS, that looks at internalizing and externalizing behaviors, but then also looking at some resources within that to support those students who are identified as needing additional support.
Yes.
Did I capture that?
Absolutely. Those resources for those small group and individual needs are important.
I will work with Vince, and I know Megan is also on that team to discuss that further. I think that's one of the things that we initially began to talk about when we started the transition from SEL, recognizing that we have students who have a variety of needs, whether that be academic, behavioral, or from a social emotional standpoint. And so that work is in the works from a system development standpoint, and then identifying for each of those levels what type of interventions. And I think the other piece that we have not yet explored is what resources can be provided to support those individuals who are doing the work. And I think, the team has a good cross section of the district. And so it might be advantageous for us to revisit how that CAT time is being used. So we may need to look at splitting off some of those individuals to explore varying types of screeners. I know your school actually piloted one. Or to look at resources that may support. So I think that conversation needs to come back to the forefront, and I will work and connect with Vince to kind of look at where we need to engage to ensure that that's in place.
Sure. And we'll do our part at the building level too, to check in and make sure that classroom teachers feel the support, or what suggestions, ideas, what needs they have in terms of addressing those day-to-day needs when our team is stretched in other spaces.
Thank you for that. This item is coming from our middle school reps. Thank you for this one. It has been impactful on students having permanent subs this year. Will this be something that we have in the future years? Has this item been built into the long-term budget? And so, Roxana, thinking about the retention grant, was that written into the retention grant for subs for next year?
We do have subs written into the retention grant. We have the option of covering some of the sub costs this year or carrying it forward to next year. I will say that the permanent sub positions in each of the buildings has been really effective in terms of keeping continuity of instruction, making sure that adult relationships remain strong. It has been cost effective for a number of reasons. And so that is something that I would recommend that we do. I can't think of a single day when all of our permanent subs have not been in use. So, from a cost benefit standpoint, I think the benefits of that from my perspective have outweighed the costs. And I think that the building principals and the teachers who have watched that happen would concur. So that will be, a part of the budgeting process that we would need to talk about at that time. But in terms of looking at our return on that particular piece, it has worked as intended. And I've been very pleased with what that has meant for us in terms of continuity.
And so it sounds like to answer this question, we will look at that as far as a budgeting item for the next fiscal year. I think more conversation regarding what the budget can actually hold, whether it will be one permanent sub. I know this year we did add additional permanent subs due to the number of teachers who were out. And it sounds like there's a benefit for continuing to do so. So I think we can give an update during CBTF because there is a financial impact for that. My middle school team, does that answer your question? And are you okay with an update being given during CBTF?
Yes, thank you very much for the update.
Benita, if I could chime in quickly. I think one consideration to give is the percentage of staff within the buildings. I know the middle school staff is small comparative to elementary, high school, ECC. And I don't know if the subs have been, aggregated based on percentage of teachers or if it's just, a certain number per building.
That is definitely something we can talk about during our CBTF meeting. Roxana, did we look at percentage of staff, like as far as like identification, or did we just allocate subs to each building for this year?
We started with one in each building. As we've added additionals, there are more based on percentage of teachers, and at the high school, middle school, they're configured to share. I also know that principals are really good at texting each other in the morning and sending subs where subs are needed. So they have often crossed buildings.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions or feedback regarding that topic that was lifted? All right, the next topic comes from the high school reps. And this one is, can the high school finalize the semester before the winter break next year? And basically indicating the impact of having final exams after first semester after the break. And so I actually was having this conversation earlier, so great question. And looking at the calendar that it's already been solidified, Rachel, what shifts will we need to make, or what might we need to look at to ensure that we have the hours necessary required by DESE if we wanted to potentially look at shifting the calendar for the 22-23 school year?
Well, as you indicated earlier, the number of days is no longer necessarily a requirement. It's all about hours. So it would just become a mathematical equation of how many hours you have in your day. And then if you want your semesters to be equal, which typically they do for curricular purposes, especially when you have a credit bearing course that are like if you teach one each semester and it's the same course, you need them to be equal. So it just becomes potentially extending the day to add more time to get that, to reach our minimum required hours. We also,
So I know-
our start date was pushed back. There was a law pushing our start date back, which made it much harder to meet those hours before winter break with the current configuration of the schedule. Is it always used to be before winter break?
I was going to just say for historical purposes, we were before winter break for a long time. And actually the secondary teachers requested that it be moved because of the imbalance in the length of semester and the curricular impact that was having. So there are pros and cons to both scenarios.
So I think what we will do for this item, if the high school team is agreeable, is to, I think, one, research surrounding districts that currently in their semester before winter break. And then Rachel, I will ask if you can look at the number of hours in the day for the high school schedule. Keep in mind that sometimes when you ask for things, there are unintended consequences when you make those shifts. So be mindful that if you're looking to end the semester, you may be losing something. So if you're okay with that, I definitely can have Rachel to look into what that impact would be. And the next step, if it is doable, would be to bring those changes to the board for approval. So we will look into that. It sounds like, Roxana, would there be any impact from a budgeting standpoint for that if we do that? Or Chris, changing as far as like payroll paying out if we switch, are there any impacts that way?
There shouldn't be any budgeting impact, but we do have, the teacher contract day issue. So looking at teacher contract days and where we actually put, as we do every year with CBTF, looking at work days, looking at how many days before school. So calendar committee and CBTF would just need to, we can adjust student minutes any way we want, but figuring out how to nest those with the teacher contract days, I think is the consideration.
So Rachel, is it in preparation for our next, let's put that one on the teacher leader forum agenda? And if we can look at some probable considerations that can be added to at least potentially look at whether or not that's something that's doable.
Yeah, and Rachel's probably already thinking this, but we also have shared staff with middle school, high school, so that would impact our schedule as well. But definitely the impact is greater for the high school.
Yeah. Just to chime in, I know it's already been said, but the biggest structural challenge is the state law that does not allow us to start school earlier. That was a deal breaker. Really, it made it really difficult to end that semester before winter break. Not impossible, but really hard.
Well, I will tell you that there's a penalty. So just to kind of share with the group, some superintendents have been pushing a little bit on DESE to see what the impact for that. So there is a financial impact by which the department would withhold some of our funds that we receive. And depending on the size of the district, it can range from anywhere to $5,000 per day to larger districts up to $15,000 per day. So we definitely cannot start earlier. So we have to look at the current schedule and how those days fit to see if it's possible. So it's something worth exploring, not saying that it's something that can be done, but we can provide an update during our next meeting.
Dr. Jameson, I mean, it's in regard to student start date though, right? I mean, it would be possible to do something like front load teacher PD or something like that.
Any other questions, thoughts about that particular item? All right, the next topic is coming from let's see, the Early Childhood Center, and it is, when was the last audit of MRH district calendar for use of PD days, early release days, and blackout days? The student days versus teachers' days. Historically, teachers are higher for professional development, academic calendar planning. So I see that the team indicated the number of days that other school districts have listed. So can you, I guess, the ECC rep, one of the reps from the ECC, are you asking to reduce the number of days in the calendar, or I'm trying to specifically see what your ask is for this particular topic?
This one kind of led more into that second question with kind of our use of early release days. And we just kind of, Scott just kind of threw that out there, put that in there as far as, you know, when we're looking at alternate means of instructional days or snow days, because for our kiddos, that snow day thing versus that alternate means of instruction was huge for these little ones. So just kind of looking at a calendar audit and are we, you know, the use of snow days and things like that in the future. That was the main purpose of that part. And then the looking into the early release days, would it be possible? Because a lot of the teachers, the feeling is they're not getting a whole lot out of the early release day. There's not a whole lot of really in-depth curriculum planning going on, and they're thinking better use of early release days.
So I think I'm hearing two things. The one that surfaced is the AMI days versus the snow days. I will say that I'm glad you brought this one up. One, the state has allocated 36 hours for us to use for AMI. Most districts build in additional snow days, but of course, when you build those days in, if they are used, it pushes the school year back. And so the middle and high school schedule posed a challenge. And so would have loved to have 3 snow days, but my question would be for the team, do you want to be in school further into the month of June, knowing that summer school is occurring? So as Ed convenes the team and looks at the calendar for the 23-24 school year, that is definitely something they can explore. Districts do have the opportunity to build in snow days, and if those snow days aren't used, they typically either give those days back or make adjustments as necessary. But right now, unless we want to push the school year out, we have to use the AMI days.
And I'd like to clarify just for Paula, just for the group, like blackout days are not calendar days. Blackout days are so-called blackout days exist by board policy. So they're any day before or after a holiday and the first or last day of school. And that just simply means that folks could not use personal leave on those days. And that's to make sure that holidays don't turn into extended days where we do not have staff in buildings to receive children. So those days are reserved for non-personal leave days to make sure that we have plenty of staff to accommodate kids.
And just as a reminder too, we did extend Thanksgiving break or fall break for teachers. So that was also an additional adjustment that was made. So as we think about responding to the request of staff when they say they need time, the board has been quite gracious for the items that we brought forward to try our very best to give that time back. And please keep in mind, we know that these are trying times and it is very difficult, particularly being engaged with students during the pandemic. So sometimes where you give, you lose something. But that's something we can look into. And Ed, I'm gonna ask that you add that to your list of considerations when you work with the calendar committee around what the impact would be for building in snow days. And that would be for the 23-24 calendars. Keep in mind the 22-23 calendar has already been developed. So that's a consideration, and an update from the committee can actually be provided during the teacher leader forum group. And I think the other question sounds like you're asking about early release that's currently being used for CAT planning.
Yes.
And so when you say the time is not being productive, and this is for clarity for me, Can you say more?
I'm just, the overall feel for a lot of teachers is by the time we get to whatever building or wherever else we're going to, in that hour's time, it's really hard to really get deep and build on the curriculum for just, because we're meeting for like an hour.
Mhm.
So the suggestion was we don't really we don't have time built in to work on our metaphors, our building metaphors, and maybe perhaps finding a time in our schedules that we could work on those building metaphors.
So it sounds like there potentially needs to be a survey to get feedback from staff regarding the effectiveness of CAT time and whether or not that time is enough time to do any curricular work and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful to hear what most people are thinking. Yeah.
Roxana, can you put that down as an item since you oversee and support the CATs, to survey staff to see how beneficial and maybe even adding, what they would like to see on that time? I will say that Roxana is currently working to develop a curriculum cycle, which would allow us an opportunity to look at what needs to be revised, if there are materials or programs to support that what's there, and allow an opportunity for each year, and then also looking at what those revisions would look like. So there may be some opportunity to look at some curricular revision work outside of the scope of the regular school year. It sounds like, I guess for the others that are on the call representing the middle and high school, do you have any thoughts about the topics shared from the ECC around the effectiveness of the CAT time? And I want to clarify, not that the time is not beneficial, but due to the travel time and the amount of time that's remaining after travel, it does not allow enough time to do deep work. So just kind of middle high school, you guys have any thoughts about that?
I can tell you from middle school standpoint and from gifted standpoint, we've gotten more done in this last 2 years than we have probably in the last 6 in terms of intentionality, usage of time, breaking out in groups, coming back together, sharing what we need to do. When it comes to, working on curriculum, that gets a little bit, that's definitely not enough time, but we are getting things done.
Very helpful. What about the high school?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feels like we're making a lot of progress when we're meeting. As far as, curriculum writing, I kind of like what we're doing now. I don't know, Sam, maybe Dr. Smith, maybe you want to jump in on this, but I think I like what we're doing now. I like the progress that it feels like we're making.
I will say that both of them represent our CAT. So we represent one CAT. Amy and Otto are the CCR team, which is a weird team. It represents all 4 buildings and is a little outside of the box of the normal vertical curriculum alignment. So we're a little weird special group.
But that's also helpful. I know that Roxana is also working to reground, because we do have some new hires that have come in, and of course, in the midst of a pandemic. So Roxana, do you want to talk a little bit about plans for supporting those folks?
Yeah, so we have multiple issues right now. So obviously the pandemic has been strange, and so we've had work that was moving forward, some of which has been delayed to try to give time back. I feel, as you all wouldn't be no secret to anyone on this call, very strongly that regular time set aside to meet for curriculum planning is super important, even if it's simply sharing information and using that time to set up work plans for future. I think the effectiveness of the CAT time is really reflective of the agenda planning and the intentionality with which the CATs work. I have been working with a curriculum task force over the last 3 to 4 months to look at what a hybrid curriculum cycle could work. So we have developed that. We have developed a timeline of things that should be accomplished to put some structure around. We've revisited our curriculum rubric and set expectations. And so we will be presenting all of that work very soon to the CBTF committee, because part of that work development was also to figure out how we pay CAT leaders to make sure that that intentional approach is actually happening. And then obviously we'll be bringing any cycle recommendation to the board. So I think we've heard some of these comments. Some of it is due to pandemic and stalls. Benita is very right in saying we have a lot of new folks. So we're training a lot of new people in terms of how to work to lead a CAT, how to work within a CAT. And I think it matters where the CAT is in the curriculum cycle in terms of how vital they find those meetings. So, there's always an ebb and flow. I'm looking at Abby shaking her head. I know the math team has been really using those meetings very effectively. There's several folks have, and I know others that are in a lull where they have deeper work to do and they feel like they can't get started in the hour and a half that's provided. So I think all of those perspectives are real, but in my opinion, the CAT time is needed. And we need to put some more structure around it so that folks are very clear what they need to accomplish in a given year or in a given time. And we're working to do that.
Thank you for that. And I think, the other piece is I'm very curious to know if that's something that is germane just to the ECC and if additional supports need to be provided there as well. So I will make a note to visit the ECC to observe some of the CATs that are taking place. But I have been in the math CAT and they have been engaged across the school year as well as the SEL CAT. And I think it would be beneficial just to get a survey out to get feedback. And then I think, part of it is not only getting feedback, but asking for potential solutions. So if there is something that is not happening, naming that within the information that's provided in the survey, but then thinking about how can we improve and what support is needed, which is the other piece.
The other thing I wanted to share, Dr. Jameson, is on the CAT process is I think that the ECC elementary school have an additional structural challenge just because their dismissal time is different than with older kids. In terms of parents being late to pick up kids and cabs, and I think it's a harder transition. Ms. Justice kind of addressed it, like transitioning from the closing of a younger school to go to another building to start your CAT. There is something lost with that. I think middle school, high school does have some transitional challenges, but by and large, older kids can take care of themselves. Bell rings, they, for the most part, get home. The buses are running on time, et cetera. So I think that's been overall kind of a challenge, the transition. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but there are some efficiencies with Zoom. I did notice in our last CAT team meeting that we did by Zoom that more people participated and were on time because they weren't having to they could just take a work from their office. And, and I'm like Dr. Smith, we have this strange, quirky CAT that has representatives from all the buildings. And we were able to kind of get started kind of quickly. Even when a couple of our teammates were having some transition, we were able to kind of dive right in. So just some structural things to think about.
Thank you, Vince. That was helpful. So it sounds like we're going to send out a survey just to get feedback from district teachers, staff to see what's going well, because I also think, and I heard that there are benefits to our CAT work and continuing that, but looking at who also needs to be supported and looking at removing barriers that may exist that are hindering teachers and staff members to being productive during that time. Anything else for that particular topic? All right, the next items fall under district communications. This question or topic came from the middle school, and it's regarding the communication methods for the district. It's noting the new text feature, which I will say I love, but also is indicating that there are some infrequencies with the robocalls going out. So Ms. Kruger or someone from the middle school team, can you maybe share more regarding what the ask is or what needs to be addressed for this particular item?
Yeah, I can go ahead and comment on that. I think with some staff members, they received some of the notifications, and some received all of them. And so it's just kind of, there's discrepancies of like, what is the mode of communication? And I guess, so yeah, I guess the discrepancies really is what the issue is.
So it sounds like there are some who may not have opted into some of the forms of communication, so they need to either know how to do that.
Mhm.
Ed,
I'd love
can
to jump
you-
in. Yeah.
yeah,
If I knew that we had a 100% opt-in for the texts, I'm hard pressed to think of a reason that I would ever do another robocall. It's just, it's just not necessary. But again, we don't have 100% opt-in. I don't know what the percentage is. I could find out if I had a moment. I just haven't checked. It's actually pretty high. I think the last time I checked, it was over 50%. Are you? I guess I'm wondering, are you saying that are you suggesting that there should be more robocalls?
No, I'm not suggesting that. I guess maybe send, I don't know, where staff did not receive text, maybe like try and figure out how we can get 100% for those staff members that do need to get the text still, and we can encourage them to opt in.
Yeah, that can be done.
Okay.
can I ask a follow-up
Could
question?
do a
to Ed?
robocall to do that.
Funny.
And I think Ed did create a screencast to walk staff through how to actually sign up and send an email out. Just as a clarifying question, do you think this is a challenge for staff members who have kids in the district, which would mean that they often may get a robocall and a text, or is it just either mode of communication for individuals who do not have staff, children in the district?
I don't believe it came from someone that had a student in the district.
Perfect.
Are you aware of anyone who didn't get a robocall? That would concern me. If we know of somebody, in our organization who did not get a robocall, that would need to be explored. That would probably mean that the phone which they have in their employee profile in School Messenger is not what they're using.
Okay, I don't know. Amy Kruger, do you know if you want to chime in? But off the top of my head, I do not know.
No.
This would be a great time for me to remind folks that our systems for employees are only as good as the information we have in them. And so if folks move, change addresses, change phones, filling out a change form with HR is usually the best way to go, because then we can make sure that all of the systems are updated.
Roxana, can we send that back out as a response to this and ask those individuals who have, I know you've sent it before, but let's send that back out. And then Ed, if you can run maybe a report and look at the analytics for the number of staff members who have actually opted in for the text messaging, and then send something else back out with the hopes that the telephone numbers and contact information have been updated, which will allow them to opt in. So I think that's an easy fix for that. And Ed has been quite diligent to ensure that we have full participation. Does that address the middle school question or concern there regarding the modes of communication?
Yes, I believe so. Thank you.
You.
I didn't know if you had something. There's so many people on, I can't see you.
I'm here. Yeah, I'll be taking care of those audits.
Thank you. All right, so the next topic is a topic from the middle school, and interesting, Chris and I and the team have talked about the middle school schedule and the number of minutes in the schedule, which has been an ongoing topic. And so the request here is asking if we can look at the start time to either add minutes so that there's enough time in the schedule for student minutes. And so the middle school team, are you asking more or less as it relates to snow days, or just trying to see where
Well,
this question?
just kind of, so in the mornings, staff gets there at 7:45 and students are able to come in at 8:15, and then our start time is 8:30. So at the middle school, the students just come straight to the classroom. They don't really linger about. I would say the majority of them just come straight in. So there were staff members kind of talking about like that 15 minutes there. It seems like a long time. If we maybe started, in the future at some point at 8:25, would that be able to tag on some more minutes for, I guess, so we're not so constrained all the time with making sure that we have enough minutes for when we do have, a snow day or need to make a calendar shift.
So I think what was shared with me upon my entry, because I did ask about the start time and what that time in the morning was to be used for. And I believe it was to be used for collaboration or PLC time, which is what's been built in. So is the ask to reduce the 15 minutes and not have the collaboration time for the middle and high school at the front end of the day? Remember, there are always unintended consequences. So you can pull that time back, but then that means that the time that's being allocated for planning and collaboration wouldn't exist. I know, Roxana, if you can kind of share what has happened in the past regarding that time and the rationale for the schedule change.
Well, I'm sure most folks remember that we had a multi-year high school scheduling committee that worked, that made recommendations. We tried a schedule for a year, and the high school, middle school came back with the recommendation for this schedule that had built in time for PLCs and collaboration in the morning. So it has been a journey to get to this schedule. The unintended consequences of the schedule, which we knew when the schedule was approved, was that it was going to leave us significantly shorter on student instructional minutes, which has created a number of challenges in a number of ways, particularly around snow days, in addition to just loss of instructional time. So there are pros and cons to anything, and there are consequences to choices. I don't know that I have much more to say about it than this is the latest iteration of a conscious choice that was made based on the building's priorities at the time.
Dr. Dietrich, Dr. Grauer, any thoughts about the acts from the, I guess it's the middle school, but it would also impact the high school. So, and just so that I'm clear, are we asking to not include the collaboration and planning time at the front end as a means to adjust the calendar to ensure that there are enough instructional minutes? Is that the ask, middle school team?
I really think the ask was, I know that Rachel has worked out minutes to a T, and the question was, would shaving 5 minutes off, if kids are able to get in the building at like 8:15, would shaving 5 minutes off of them going to their lockers and coming into class? Because as Eve said, the hallways are clear at 8:25. All the kids are in their classes. Would that assist us in not walking up to that minute by minute time need?
I think
it wasn't the entire morning, it was just like 5 minutes. So
yeah, I think there's a couple things at play there. I think we definitely can, and those 5 minutes. And the one thing to consider also, though, is that right now we're not serving breakfast in the morning. So when we talk about kids are already in the room at 8:25. A couple of years ago, they would have been in the cafeteria, and we're ushering them upstairs. That being said, I still think it's worth looking into, and I think it would be the right decision adding some instructional minutes in the morning and being able to relieve some of the stress of Rachel Ward. Yeah.
Dr. Grauer, would that have an impact on your building schedule if that is explored further?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd be open to exploring it. It depends what we end up doing. You know, it's hard to answer that question without knowing. But yeah, we do like the morning times to meet. And as Mike said, it's a very different looking school in the morning when we have breakfast in the building because kids are coming and it's crowded early and supervision roles changes when that happens. So we actually have more time now to meet than we've ever had in the morning, which we like. We understand the challenge of minutes, but we knew, as Roxana said, going in, that was going to be a challenge. And we, you know, I willingly accepted that. And I think our team did, knowing that we were going to have the schedule that we had kind of yearned for and just went through a long process to get to. So, but we're open to anything, you know, if it's going to help the greater good, we'll definitely look into it.
Rachel, can you run the numbers to see what the impact would be to shave back 5 minutes and then be prepared to have that information during our next teacher leader meeting? And we can add that as an agenda item. And then the last topic, which has also been discussed during our teacher leader meetings, is around plexiglass and the data that supports that, and then the steps to removing it. So I will tell you that prior to winter break, plexi was the first thing we were looking to remove as a mitigation measure. And as you're aware, when we return, the surge definitely caused pause to that. And we are seeing currently a decline regionally and even at the local level regarding positivity rates. So we're trending in the right direction. And one of the things that kind of stood firm for me is the idea of barriers. And so at the time, anything that we put in place will create an additional barrier for students. But I think Vince probably said it best at the last session that was facilitated with Dr. Newland, is that the kids see it as a reminder, while we recognize that it currently is a hindrance for our teaching staff. We meet Mondays in our COA team. We review and discuss data. So please know, as soon as we feel that the data supports removing the mitigation measure of plexi, that plexi will be removed. And so right now we're still at about 22% at the regional level. We can add this item back to our COA agenda and also give an update during our teacher leader meeting that's scheduled. Vince, do you have anything to add to this item?
No, other than our team feels the same way. We love to get to see a day where we don't have plexi and masks. We also, you know, we hit that surge. It was so unexpected, and it just caused us to hit pause. You know, we're hoping that the spring will create other opportunities to remove mitigating measures. We track that data every single day. Like, we look at those numbers every day, more than once a day. But the thing about the plexi, I think the barriers, I mean, I think there's some benefit, but talking with students, some students, not all, they say it's a reminder to keep distance. That's why it's kind of a visual reminder. But I do think it has, eventually that'll be the first thing to go, I think, will be the plexiglass. And I know it's not holding up, so I don't think we're going to invest more money in getting new plexiglass at this point. So it's been up for about a year, it sounds like, right? January 26th, I think, is when we put it up, when we opened up.
Thank you, Vince, for that. So that actually concludes the topics. And before I turn it back over to President Miller or the board, I do want to highlight that in looking at the minutes from a 2016 meeting, there was some discussion regarding whether or not this particular committee is still needed, because we have support staff forum, teacher leader forum. We also have CBTF, as well as PDC and some other groups that meet to support the work and provide opportunities for staff members to bring forth concerns. So I just want to have some discussion to inquire with the group whether or not those forums are beneficial to address the issues or concerns that are being elevated from our buildings? And if so, moving forward to modify the current district policy to have those groups to actually address the concerns that come out for future concerns that may surface. So I will pause. Again, that change was supposed to happen in 2016, and see if there are any questions or allow an opportunity for members of this team to react to that.
Well, I do remember that we took a pause from communications forum because we felt like we had other forums to address the concerns. I think the pandemic changed that. And what I heard from, our new colleagues and old colleagues is that we have a wonderful school board, and most of those committees don't have school board representation. So I think it's just the thing about communication forum that is different. I was looking at these agenda topics. I'm like, oh, we've talked about this in other meetings, but what's different is our school board can hear it directly. And I think that has some benefit, probably. And I did think, is it something that needs to be in place forever? Probably not. But I think, after a couple of years off and with the pandemic, it seemed like there was an opportunity because there seemed to be an interest from our teaching staff to really be able to speak directly to the board about their concerns and worries. And I think to that degree, it does have some value.
I will say that the information, whether it's in board updates or in my one-on-ones, this information for the most part is shared with the board. And we are looking at efficiency and use of time. So a lot of these items, as I sat and reviewed them with Kat, have for the most part either been discussed in either CBTF, support staff forum, or our teacher leader forum, and have been items that we have covered. So I think part of that, which thank you, Ms. Kruger, for putting that in the chat, indicating that it may be beneficial to send something out to the group saying which committee is responsible for what. And so Roxana, if you can get that out to our staff, I think that would be beneficial, because that was one of the things that we talked about, I believe, in the CBTF meeting, because Plexi, I believe, was an item that actually came up, and we were like, now where does this one belong? So that would help to outline what goes where and help those who may want to bring an item forward, having them to have the ability to do so. But I do believe in efficiency and not being redundant as well. And I think that the other forums, and of course, CBTF does have representation currently from our board members who also give updates during our board meetings, which are recorded, and those who are able to plug in and watch. If not, they are available to review on YouTube. So what I am asking again is whether or not we continue with this, because there does need to be a modification. What I plan to bring to the board is to modify the policy and to specifically name the current committees that we have that address this. So if there is not opposition to that, and if there is, please thumbs up, raise your hand, unmute, so that this item can actually be looked at, whether it's by our district attorney and then being shared with MSBA for that modification to be made.
Yeah, and I would just say, for the benefit of the district staff, you don't want us in the weeds of the decisions that, some of which have been discussed here. I appreciate that the spirit of transparency and, sharing is, engaging us. But, there are school boards around the state that get into the real weeds of, who should be the first base, player on the baseball team, right? Like that is, you all are the experts. You all have our trust and our support. And so I think these meetings sometimes become challenging. We certainly want to make sure that there's open communication between the board and the teachers and staff working on the front lines, but finding that right balance of how we know what's going on and how we hear the concerns and make sure that we're prioritizing the things that are most necessary is really got to come through the admin teams and the forums that, have been acknowledged here. So again, appreciate that this is a small district, that this is a district where we all have personal relationships in addition to our professional relationships with each other. But again, you don't want us in the details of some of these decisions that are really good for you all to discuss, but keep the control of them away from us.
Thank you for that, Katie. I always say the 30,000 foot view is, where we want to keep the board. I did not see any hands or objections, so I am going to turn it back over to Madam President Miller.
Thank you. So our next agenda item is an action item. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you everyone for all of your time.